This is the Jeff Santos Show.
Well, I'm hoping that if Kamala Harris could be the VP, we're going to have senator appointed by Gavin Newsom, and it's going to be an interesting pick because he's got a lot of good people to pick from.
Yeah, no, that would be a good pick. If she's not going to be National Security Advisor, I'd rather have her on the Senate floor, that's for sure. Shepherding stuff and so forth.
Yeah, that would be great because I think we're going to see a progressive senator if Kamala Harris can make it to the VP spot. But the thing we also have to realize, Jeff, is we're going to have to really be careful here when we vote. And we're going to have to educate people in certain areas of the country how their vote's going to count, because the Republicans are going to find ways to, suppress the vote, and people need to be educated on what it's going to take for their vote to count, whether they're going to have to go in person and vote, or what ways they can, make sure their vote is counted, because there's an all-out suppression. And
there's no doubt.
This worries me greatly, Jeff, because I think that the post office has already been sabotaged. And I think that Democrats and people need to educate our voters how we can make sure that our votes count and what it's going to take for that to happen, whether we've got to go in person or whether we have to basically vote early with mail-in ballots. I mean, this is going to take a lot of work. They've really put a monkey wrench into our voting, and we've got to be ready for it, because this man will do anything, and he'll stoop to any level to be reelected. He's a loser, and he's desperate.
With that, I want to keep you right there. I'm going to bring in our great friend a little earlier today because of Melissa Tomlinson's meeting that has gone on too long. And bring in our good friend. He is, of course, the Renaissance man of the Jeff Santos Show, and a great musician, nonetheless, a great journalist, Mark Taylor-Canfield here. And Mark, we appreciate you coming on a couple of minutes early here, but I want to address what Mark is saying here in terms of voter suppression and also in terms of the snake and what we heard last night from what I'm seeing on Twitter from you, from Donald Trump. How concerned are voters in Seattle that you talk to about voter suppression, A, and a B, about making sure that Trump, even though Joe Biden is not the favorite candidate there, that you vote Biden to stop this Nazi from getting 4 more years?
Well, can you hear me, Jeff?
Yeah, go right ahead, Mark. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. This is a guy who illegally appointed the heads of Homeland Security. You've had Greg Palast on. We at Democracy Watch News interviewed Greg, great investigative reporter about voter suppression in the United States, and his book, how Trump is going to steal the election in 2020. So, and by the way, that podcast was featured by TuneIn, which so we're very proud of that. But it was a very shocking and very important interview. I think it hasn't really settled in on most people the real threat that this democracy is facing. Let's put it this way. I think at this point the Republicans are definitely are not living up to the name of their party. They would probably just love Mussolini, as far as I can tell. I have been studying some of these dictators to try to figure out what Trump is all about. And it's very clear that you frighten people, usually with some ethnic minority. In this case, it would be immigrants, or Muslims. You pick somebody, some powerless class of people in your society to attack.
People of color, mainly in this country. You saw what happened in Kenosha. It's another African-American.
Oh, well, Jeff, I took a vacation and went and did some diving and and the next thing I know, and by the way, it's been glorious weather here in Seattle, but don't tell anyone. But I wake up one day and from this brief vacation, I realized, lo and behold, another black man shot by police, this time in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So more protests around the country. The cops are declaring riots in Portland and Seattle. And Portland cops are using tear gas again. It seems like a nightly event there. So there was a march in New York City. And then, by the way, as you mentioned earlier, you're right on it there, the Lafayette police shot a man there 11 times. So don't expect the protests to stop while police are still killing people of color. And in Seattle last week, police used tear gas, pepper spray, and basketball grenades again on protesters, despite 2 major lawsuits and a city council ban on these so-called crowd control devices on Black Lives Matter protesters. So at the same time that you've got this major uprising against violence by police around the country, you've also got a president who really would love to steal the election. I mean, these people...
No doubt. We got about 20 seconds, Mark. We'll go to break and come right back.
Well, these people are so corrupt that they don't care. Robert was completely right when he said that they just don't care. These people are ruthless.
They really, truly are. Mark from San Francisco, stay with us, folks. We'll bring you back on to talk with Mark Taylor-Canfield. You are tuned in to the Jeff Santos Show, the Revolution Radio Network. Back after this.
This is the Jeff Santos Show.
Welcome back. It is the Jeff Santos Show, 33 minutes past the hour. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield, folks. This is his new music. This is first time on air anywhere in the country, folks. Exclusive. The Jeff Santos Show. MTC on the airwaves. I tell you, man, that music you got, dude, that's going to go very far. I want to ask you, did I hear a little female backup singers there?
Yes, I did a little bit myself, but there's also some women who helped me out with that song.
Very cool.
We did it all remotely, sort of like we did with the Quarantine Suite, that classical piece I came up with. I just, showed them the parts, and we shared roots, which is what they call the main samples of the songs,
right,
through the internet, and we did it all remotely. It was pretty cool. But I'm just glad to be doing music, man. I mean, I'm glad to be rocking Seattle again, because people are really jonesing for music. I was out at Green Lake yesterday playing some music, and on Sunday, and literally, like, people started bringing their boats by and their floaties devices just to listen to the music. These girls got up on the beach and started dancing to the music I was playing. People really want live music, and we're just not getting much of it yet in Seattle, so it's been very difficult for the fans and for the musicians. So I'm going to just keep rocking Seattle no matter what. It's, regardless of what happens in the White House, in Seattle, you bet we'll be doing rock and roll music.
Well, I don't doubt that. And you're going to be right in the thick of it, Mark Taylor-Canfield. And you can find out more at Twitter at MTC. And, of course, Democracy Watch News and a lot of other places. And we'll give out the YouTube channel before we roll as well for Mark. I want to bring in our good friend Mark as well from San Francisco in a second here. But it seems to me that this scenario right now calls for progressives, which you talk to a lot in your line of work. And, of course, Seattle's got a ton of them. A lot of them are huge Sanders supporters, some for Warren. And, in fact, the split of Warren and Sanders probably led to Joe Biden winning the primary this past time, if you think about it. And I'm wondering, though, Mark Taylor-Canfield, if you believe that this is the time to not, be in the dumps and, be a Debbie Downer on the Biden-Harris ticket, but to sort of, really push hard on them. At the same time, push them to be more Bernie-like, or I like to say, FDR labor left, which I think encompasses a lot of what Bernie and Warren have been talking about and fighting for. It gives them a little more cover. MTC, what are your thoughts on that? And we'll bring in our good friend Mark, who's a labor guy himself. from San Francisco. Go ahead, MTC.
Well, we talked about music, so I have to give a quick plug to Eva Walker and the Black Tones, and also Shane and Shepherd and Barack. So the two best bands, I think, right now, at least my two favorite bands in Seattle, So I just wanted to give that a shout-out to them. But I think that Seattle, has been ahead of the curve on the progressive movement for a long time, so we always feel like people are dragging us back. And so we're ready for national health care. We're ready for a lot of the progressive agenda that people have been dragging their feet on in the Democratic Party for a long time. So anybody who wants to push Biden and Kamala Harris more to a progressive FDR-type agenda, I'm all for it. And I think if they want to be on the right side of history, then it's high time for them to do that. This is not, 2016. This is a whole new world, and they need to react, I think, like FDR would during times of war or economic depression, which is you use the government and you use your resources to keep people alive and keep them going and keep the economy going. And people are starting to get more used to the idea of subsidies for small businesses, subsidies for artists and things to keep it going. And I think that it will be more and more what you'll see in the future. Some will call it maybe democratic socialism or something like that, but it's just where we're headed, regardless of any right-wing backlash at the moment.
MTC, before we bring in our good friend Mark from San Francisco once again, I mentioned this to him earlier. But, when you mentioned artists, it was Ray Davies of the Kinks, Lola and all that, who was on the dole in the UK in the early 1960s before, his stardom. And, so that's just one example. This idea that, everybody's going to sit home and eat bonbons and so forth is just, phooey. But, that's just an example in your field and in the great world of music. You give people an opportunity, and they can have great success, as obviously the Kinks did.
Well, I told you the story once before. I think about my travels in Europe and how my music was presented at a international music competition in France, in Bourges, France, and that the French Ministry of Culture and UNESCO and the departments and the ministry, that each department and each district's arts and culture ministry funded. So that was typical in Europe at the time. Is there was plenty of money for the arts, and they were very, very proud of their culture. And I came back to the United States and then found a very different story where there isn't that much funding for the arts. And unfortunately, what happens because of that is that you have a lot of really talented people, and I know a lot of them in Seattle, who are just not making much money from their music, and they have a day job, and maybe most people don't know what they're doing because they just don't have the economic viability to do what it takes these days to promote your music, to book yourself, to license and distribute the music, to do all of the things that you have to do, get it copyrighted, and invest time and money into recording it and touring and all of that. It takes some kind of investment. It's really hard to do if you have no money. So it does have an effect on arts and culture. And there was a tweet out earlier today. I'll look it up to see who it was because I retweeted it. But it's Richard Wolff who said the super rich are not more talented than others. Science says luck explains their wealth. So by taxing the super rich, we actually lose no talent or productivity, but we gain a much better, fairer society. So right. I'd say same thing about music.
And you get Ray Davies. You get more Ray Davies and less. Yeah. In
the music
Donny
business,
Osmonds.
the most talented people are not always the ones making the most money. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Mark from San Francisco, thank you for holding. What I think is a comparison here, and even though 49er and Seahawks fans don't like each other, you got Pete Carroll, who's from the Bay Area, and of course is the great coach of the Seahawks, kind of bring you together. But you're two of the most progressive cities in the country. And I think, as I was talking to MTC, Mark from San Francisco, that, to me, if those two cities, put the pressure on Joe Biden to go FDR, labor left, and at the same time, get behind Biden-Harris ticket, that will do a lot to encourage other cities around the country to do the same thing. I'm thinking about Milwaukee, I'm thinking about Detroit, I'm thinking about Philadelphia, some of those swing states. And swing cities, to come out and vote in big numbers I don't know what your thoughts are there, Mark. You're like Seattle, San Francisco. Those are really progressive bastions that can really push the rest of the country, particularly the other cities.
Well, hopefully Gavin Newsom will have some clout in pushing that as our governor. And also, Oregon is pretty progressive as well.
Yeah.
All three of us, I think if all three of us started doing things together, we'd have some really good clout in saying which direction a Democratic administration could go. My concern right now is Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing everything they can to silence our voices.
That's right.
By suppressing the vote. And that's my first concern right now is I'm concerned that people need to be educated on how their vote will count because I believe that the post office has already been sabotaged. So my concern is if people aren't educated on what to do in this circumstance, we're going to be in trouble because this man is ruthless and he'll do anything he can to stay in office, cheat, lie, and steal. And we got to be up for that.
Let me bring in MTC here. Mark Taylor-Canfield, I mean, when you hear Mark from San Francisco, talk about this, particularly, on the issue of voting. I mean, is all of Washington State now all mail like Oregon, or are there still going to be some places where you go, even though it can take your life into your hands, still a voting booth, in different parts of the state?
As far as I know, the entire state of Washington is mail-in voting, and it has been for several election cycles now. The opportunity to drop off your vote does exist in King County, in Martin Luther King Jr. County, where I live,
which is Seattle, right?
So
right.
If you don't want to trust the mail, then you can actually go to a drop box. So that helps alleviate some people's fears, and I would highly recommend that approach in other counties around the country, because that way, if you want to go out, there's, and you can, and when you do mail-in voting, you get your ballot weeks before the election, so it gives you a lot more time to peruse the issues, especially if there are a lot of initiatives on the ballot, and then you also have more time to get your ballot in, and so you don't normally see, except maybe the last minute on the day of. You might see people in line dropping off their ballots, but most of the time, people just go whenever it's convenient for them after work or on their way to work or whatever on their lunch break and drop it off in one of these drop boxes. And so there's not a big health factor there. By the way, Jeff, I just wanted to throw this at you. The breaking from the New York ACLU, the police misconduct database that they just released contains more than 300,000 complaints about 81,550 officers in New York City, but fewer than 3% of those complaints actually led to a New York Police Department penalty. So that's part of the problem that we're looking at. Now, Washington State did pass an initiative that makes it easier for prosecutors to actually charge police. So there is a case right now, out of Auburn, Washington, where a man was killed and the police officer is being charged with second-degree murder and I believe first or second-degree assault. So we do have an initiative in Washington State that was passed that might also serve as sort of a model, because before that the Seattle Times had done this excellent journalism, and they went back to the early part of the 2000s, and out of 200 police shootings, only one officer had ever been prosecuted. So that was an example of how really good journalism actually helped lead to an initiative to challenge that. So there's things that can be done if there's a political will and if the people are serious about this movement for justice. And I'm just going to keep saying it again, that people want justice, and they're really sick and tired of racism and violent cops. It's got to end. But unfortunately, we have a Republican Party in this country which, like I said, would probably really like a Mussolini. But you know what? We've had some really great conversations at Democracy Watch News during our press briefings. And also, I did the other day with a friend from West Africa, from the Gambia. And he was telling me, he was saying, Mark, in my country, if there's a problem, somebody steals something, there's some violence, and people go to the police, then the police go to their family and their friends, right? And then they go to them and they say, hey, people are saying this about you, what's the deal? And usually what they try to do is get the person to do some compensation. Rather than hauling them down to the jail, they will if the person just refuses to cooperate at all. But they don't want to. What they would rather do is do some kind of intervention and just make sure that the person whose money got stolen from them gets the money back. So here's your penalty for what you did. You pay this person back the amount plus some to help them and their family because, of the trauma you put them through. Otherwise, you're going to jail.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of different ways to do this, but I think one of the things we got to do is we got to reinforce the idea that police cannot continue to use lethal weapons, and unless they pass not only a test of how to use the weapon, but they gotta have an understanding of who these people are that are being hired. If you don't understand conflict resolution, you don't understand how people of color react. If you're a white person, and how to communicate with them, then you shouldn't be on the police force. End of story. Mark from San Francisco, any final comments from before we let you go for our good friend MTC?
Well, I have to agree with the music is a great outlet. And,
that's for sure.
I love jazz, and we have the SF Jazz Center here, and it's closed down, and it used to be one of my favorite outlets. I love saxophone and guitar, so there's a couple of great artists that I enjoy a lot, and when they come into town, I'd always go and see them. But and music's always been a big part of San Francisco, and it is sad, but it is still such a great outlet, and I miss it greatly. So when you can see it like you just described, people are really ready for it because we miss it. We really miss it a lot.
There's no doubt. Thank you, Mark.
San Francisco's always been a great music town. I mean, Haight-Asbury Street was the center of the hippie culture. I mean, that was the revolution right there happening on the streets every day.
And punk rock, as we found out from our good friend Lincoln Mitchell. Punk rock with Dead Kennedys in the 1970s, also a big part of the West Coast world, and wasn't as big as the Clash and of course Sex Pistols and Ramones in New York land, but
Jefferson Airplane.
Big stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, Jefferson Airplane, Grace Slick. You had Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Jerry Garcia and all of that stuff. Yeah, it's massive.
So we may have a rivalry sports-wise, but music-wise, we've been so influenced by, everybody's been influenced by the San Francisco music sound and scene from that era and beyond. So there's a lot of great music down there. I think bands should spend more time going back and forth between Seattle and San Francisco. That might help bridge some gaps there. But, I also wanted to mention, Jeff, you have been right on point on a lot of these issues that we've been talking about at Democracy Watch News and other venues that I've been involved with as a journalist. When Peel came up with the whole idea of the bobbies in England, so we have a person on our staff actually from South Africa, and he would talk about what South African police were like. And then he came to this country thinking, well, it's going to be different because, South Africa was an extreme case, but not so much.
Yeah, no.
So he was involved.
Human rights violations, apartheid. Oh, yeah.
He was actually involved in one point at helping to come up with some tests, to screen folks out of the police departments like you're talking about. So he knows exactly what you're talking about. He gave us a big presentation about that himself, which was really vital information about just how he felt when he went on a ride-along with the cops in Minneapolis, and when they found out that he was from South Africa, they just immediately assumed he was racist, so, then out came their own racist comments. So, also the fact that he agrees with you that he would say that most police in this country have no business being on a police department. They should have been screened out by intensive testing. So, that's he would back up everything you said, and this is a person who's seen the worst.
We can't allow to have people in a police force that has access to a lethal weapon that can kill people. You don't give that to just anybody. And again, I've said this before, MTC. If you're going to give a gun, a weapon of mass destruction, because, these guns can kill people instantly. Some people can survive, but, most people don't. And the fact is that if you want to do it, I would rather put it into the hands of somebody who's well-educated, well-versed, a psychologist, a negotiator, people who understand conflict resolution, before I would to have somebody who is there and is ready to sort of take the emotions of the moment, escalate them to win the day. And that does not compute any longer, and it should never have computed. But we've been, unfortunately, this has been passed down generation to generation, and it has to stop. It's one thing if nobody had any weapons and people would just be punched, and bloody eyes and bloody nose. But we're not. We're in a culture of guns, and we just need to stop it. It's just disgusting. Speaking of all this, I want to get your thoughts from our good friend John in Minneapolis, because we've talked back and forth about this, MTC, about what people in Seattle are doing. You have no longer Miss Best. Of course, the police in Minneapolis are looking to major reform. Keith Ellison there is a big disciple of Bernie Sanders and the former almost the head of the DNC. Is doing some things. I want to talk and bring in our good friend John from Minneapolis here. John, thank you for holding. My feeling is that there is going to be, I think, justifiably so, a lot of a spotlight on Keith Ellison and his son and others in the city council there in Minneapolis, and I'm hoping that other leaders back him up. I mean, is there any folks that you're hearing from other parts of the country that are coming to Keith Ellison's defense and saying, this is, we're looking at you and we want you to succeed in these reforms?
Well, I can't really say as far as other places, but I think that the city council, the majority of people that wanted, they used abolish the police, but I think that what they really meant was absolute, complete restructuring of it. And, I have to say, I'm a licensed healthcare professional. I was a respiratory therapist for nearly 40 years. My wife is a nurse. I've worked with a lot of physicians. We're all licensed. We're licensed because what we do has such an impact on people that we can cause a lot of harm. So that's why we're licensed. If in Ohio, they had licensure for police, which they don't in most places, Tamir Rice would be walking and talking today because that person that was fired, he would have never been rehired. He wouldn't have been able to continue, being licensed in the state of Ohio. And licensure is not part of, I think, most police departments, unless that's changed in the last few years. Last I checked, I was astonished. How can they have such an impact on our lives, and they have the power of life and death, and we license nurses? A lot of nurses are put out of commission as a result of violence against them.
Exactly. We found that out from our good friends at Mass Nurses Association and so forth. You're spot on. I just got a couple of minutes here. MTC, before we roll here, how much of the city council in Minneapolis and to your friend Ms. Sawant, others, are they talking? Are there phone calls, emails exchanged between those two? Because they're both, progressive, reform-oriented city councils.
Yes, and also with Eugene, because they're studying the police 911 response in Eugene, which is most of the 911 calls are handled by people other than police there. But I should tell you that our police chief, Carmen Best, was at a news briefing a couple days ago with Mayor Jenny Durkan, and Jenny Durkan announced that she is vetoing a measure by the Seattle City Council that would have cut 100 police officers from the force and resulted in substantial pay cuts to the top brass in the department, because they found that the average pay in the Seattle Police Department was over $100,000 a year, and that there were that amount of money, and some that were, 77 staff, administrative staff, and officers who were making over $200,000 a year.
Wow.
Well, you can check out what I'm doing at my YouTube channel. Just put Mark Taylor-Canfield in the search engine at YouTube, and you'll see over 400 videos we've got going there. And then Democracy Watch News, of course, is trying to follow up on all of this stuff with our Democracy Cast podcast. So I just want to thank everybody for sticking with the Jeff Santos Show because it's really important that this information gets out there, and there aren't a lot of vehicles in the corporate media to do that. So thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark, for all you do as well. And I want to thank Ron Carter for producing this broadcast. Thank you to all of our great listeners and callers. Wish we could have given you some more time. We'll keep on fighting for tomorrow. We're going to be talking a lot of foreign policy with Mr. Korb and Mr. Garvey.
This is the Jeff Santos Show.